In the name of the one holy and undivided Trinity. Our gospel began this morning by saying that Jesus took his disciples into the region of Caesarea Philippi. And you may think, so what? Just another one of those ancient Near East cities with little relevance to us today. And after all, isn't the main point of that gospel reading we just heard that Peter acknowledged Jesus to be the Messiah, the Christ? So what difference does it matter where it happened? It could have happened anywhere. Yeah, it could have. But it didn't. Let me tell you a little something about Caesarea Philippi. It was located about 25 miles north of the Sea of Galilee. So we have Israel over here, and there's the Mediterranean. And Galilee is in the north. And that area is ruled over by Herod Antipas. But Caesarea Philippi, about 25 miles north of that, ruled over by his brother Philip, the Tetrarch. And this area was mostly non-Jewish. So that's the demographics. But what makes the area so fascinating is its historical significance, especially in terms of religious development. And commentators have a field day talking about the different religious associations with this site. First of all, you know, the Hebrew people had a constant struggle in their development with those who worshiped the gods of the land. And one of the most ancient of those was the Syrian god Baal, B-A-A-L. You hear it throughout the Hebrew scriptures. In fact, we even read that some of the kings of Israel succumbed to Baal worship. Well, in Jesus' day, where they were, in Caesarea Philippi, there were up to 14 temples dedicated to Baal. So this ancient temptation of the Jews to worship the gods of the land was prevalent in the very soil upon which they were standing. And not only did the Syrian gods hold sway, so did the Greek, because it was believed that Pan, the god of nature, was born in a recess in a hill, a cave-like thing. And one of our 8 o'clockers said they'd been there with the trip years ago with Father Roy, I think, or on other occasions. That was believed to be the birthplace of Pan. And in fact, the original name of the town was Panias. And even today, its name is Banias, connecting it back to that ancient Greek worship. And besides these pagan associations, there was also significance for the worshippers of Yahweh, because it was held that in that very spot where Pan was believed to have been born was the source of the Jordan River. And given the importance of the Israelites crossing the Jordan River to enter the Promised Land, that would have had great significance to the Jews as well. And then if that wasn't enough, the place also had cultic significance to the Romans, because Herod the Great, father of Antipas and Philip, had built a new temple out of white marble there in honor of the divinity of Caesar. And then his son comes along later, makes it even more splendiferous, and he changes the name of the site to Caesarea, after Caesar. But in order to distinguish it from the Caesarea on the coast, he adds his own name. It's the Caesarea of Philip. And so Caesarea Philippi was this smorgasbord of cultic and religious thought that interacted together. Syrian Baal worship, the Greek nature gods, the Hebrew God, and the cult of the divine Augustus all interacted in this ancient Near East city. It is to that place that Jesus takes his disciples, and it wasn't on the way to anything, but he takes them there to have this conversation about his identity. in the midst of fascinating religions, new and old, he asked his followers whom they believe him to be. Now, most of our forebears, including probably our own parents, even maybe some of us, grew up with an understanding of living in Christendom. That geographical area, which included the United States, where it was just assumed that everyone had a certain knowledge and agreement about who Jesus is. Well, we don't live in Christendom anymore, I tell you. But that may in fact be a blessing for us in our ability to better understand the significance of this interchange with Jesus and his disciples. Because don't we live pretty much in that kind of religious smorgasbord of ancient Caesarea Philippi? And I'm not saying that all the world's great religions don't have deep truths to share with each other, but in many ways, don't we both see that the ancient gods wafting over the land still, and Herodian temples to the New Age still being erected, if not on our hillsides, at least in our bookstores? Isn't the Judeo-Christian God just seem like one of option among many in the spiritual lineup? And I'm not implying that whether that's good or bad, just that it is. And if it is the way it is, we of all people ought to understand the import of Jesus' question and Peter's answer in Caesarea Philippi. So Jesus begins asking his disciples who people say that he is, other people. And that maybe is a good place for us to begin, to think about what do we hear about Jesus. They reported back very favorable comparisons for them. Some thought he was John the Baptist come back from the dead, others Elijah or Jeremiah or one of the prophets. Now we too have probably heard people say complimentary things about Jesus, that he was a holy man, a realized person, great religious teacher. But we've also probably heard less flattering things said about Jesus. Some people hold him to be an invention of the Christian church. Others see him as yet one more manifestation of a male patriarchal God. And of course, others dismiss him as an opiate of the people. We've heard many, many things said about who Jesus is, just as the disciples had. And after they shared those things with Jesus, then he throws the punch. But who do you say that I am? It's easy to report things that others say. Who do you say that I am? And of course, the eager, simplistic Peter just blurts out, "You're the Christ, it used to be translated Christ, this version says, you're the Messiah." It means the anointed one, the Son of the living God. Now, Peter could have said many things about Jesus, but he didn't. He didn't say, "You are the greatest preacher and teacher that ever lived. You are an unbelievable healer of sickness or a worker of miracles." Didn't say, "You are an extremely kind and sensitive person." He said, "You are the Messiah, the anointed, the child of the living God." And this proclamation of Peter is a simple cry of faith. He didn't stop to work it out in his mind. It was a cry of faith. And that faith is the rock upon which the church is built. That faith is what everything else is predicated upon. Now, we as Episcopalians know as much as anybody that faith doesn't mean we don't ask questions. It doesn't mean that we aren't sometimes confused about what we read in the Bible. It doesn't mean that we always like what we read in the Bible. It doesn't mean that we never doubt. What it means is that underneath all of our questions and our misunderstandings and confusions and likes and dislikes and doubts, we have this experience and know Jesus to be the Anointed One, the child of the living God. In the midst of ancient religions and newfound cults, of self-help programs and New Age thought, people of faith know Jesus to be the Anointed, to be at one with the living God. Now, that realization and any assertion like that can also be used as a weapon. And we know way too many people who have been wounded by overzealous Christians who see themselves as warriors for Christ. But even as we call that bad behavior out and confess those abuses, we must never shy away from and be timid about proclaiming the faith. That faith that resides within us. When we are asked, and if we are living out this faith that we celebrate week by week, we will be asked, who do you say this Jesus is? We must, with Peter, not hesitate to proclaim him that Anointed One, at one with God, the child, the Son of the living God. It is that knowledge that is our rock. It's what empowered Peter to lead the early church and to go into Rome to meet his execution. It's what gives us strength to live amidst senseless bigotry and violence and hatred and natural disaster and disease and falling apart of families and losing of jobs, all the challenges of this life. It allows us to face them. And even as churches, Christians among themselves bicker and fight over social and political and moral issues, this one rock, at least we can agree upon, that Jesus is the Messiah, the Anointed, the Holy One of God. Brothers and sisters, you and I are living in Caesarea Philippi today. Our faith proclaimed in the presence of God's new and old is the rock against which the powers of evil shall never prevail. Amen.